Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive structure floating in the void before his ship. The UES Defiance had been exploring this dead star system for 3 weeks now, and they had found nothing but empty space and cold rocks until today. The thing ahead of them was clearly not natural. It was bigger than any space station humanity had ever built, maybe 10 times the size of Earth's largest orbital facility. Dr. Kane, are you seeing this? Morrison called out to his chief scientist without taking his eyes off the view screen. The structure looked ancient, covered in what seemed like crystalline growths that caught and reflected the faint light from distant stars. Strange symbols covered its dark surface, glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Dr. Lisa Kane rushed to the bridge, her tablet already recording everything the ship's sensors could detect. She had spent her entire career studying alien artifacts, but nothing had prepared her for this. The structure was clearly artificial, but the materials were unlike anything in human databases. The symbols seemed to shift and change when she looked at them directly, as if they were alive. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from that thing," Commander Ryan Clark reported from his station. "Whatever it is, it's still active after what our scans suggest could be millions of years." He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he had developed during their long journey into unexplored space. Morrison nodded slowly. They were far from any known civilization, human or alien. The nearest human colony was 6 months away at maximum speed. If something went wrong here, they would be on their own. But this discovery could change everything humanity knew about the galaxy. "Engineer Martinez, bring us closer, but keep the engines ready for immediate departure," Morrison ordered. "Dr. Kane, I want you to prepare a full scientific survey team. We're going aboard that structure." Carlos Martinez worked quickly at his console, guiding the Defiance toward the ancient construct. The ship's sensors continued to probe the structure, revealing more mysteries with each passing minute. The thing appeared to be hollow in many places, with vast chambers that could house entire cities. But there were no life signs, no indication that anyone had been inside for a very long time. As they drew closer, Dr. Kane noticed something that made her pulse quicken. The symbols on the structure's surface were not random decorations. They formed patterns, mathematical sequences, and what looked like star charts. This was not just a building or a station. It was a repository of information, a massive library left by someone who wanted their knowledge to survive. "Captain, I'm detecting an airlock," Martinez reported. "The structure is responding to our approach. Something is powering up inside." Red warning lights began flashing on the bridge as unknown energy patterns swept across their ship. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see if they had triggered some ancient defense system. But nothing attacked them. Instead, a section of the structure's hull opened like a flower, revealing a docking bay that seemed designed to accommodate ships of various sizes and configurations. Soft lights illuminated the interior, welcoming them inside. Morrison made the decision that would change human history forever. "Take us in, Martinez." "Dr. Kane, gather your team. Commander Clark, full security detail. We don't know what we're walking into, but we're going to find out." The Defiance glided into the alien docking bay, and the hull sealed behind them with technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. Atmosphere began flowing into the bay, and within minutes the environment was breathable for humans. The structure's automated systems had somehow analyzed their ship and created perfect conditions for their arrival. Dr. Kane led her team through the airlock, their portable scanners recording everything. The interior of the structure was even more impressive than its exterior. Vast corridors stretched in all directions, their walls covered with the same shifting symbols they had seen outside. But here the symbols were more complex, telling stories in pictures and mathematical formulas that Kane began to recognize as universal concepts. The team moved deeper into the structure, following corridors that seemed to lead toward a central chamber. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound in halls that had been empty for countless years. Emergency lighting activated as they passed, responding to their presence with technology that was both alien and somehow familiar. Commander Clark kept his weapon ready, though he wasn't sure what good human firearms would do against technology this advanced. His security team spread out in standard formation, but they all felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. They were walking through the ruins of a civilization that had built things humanity could barely comprehend. Engineer Martinez stayed with the ship, monitoring their progress and maintaining communication. The structure seemed to be learning from their technology, adapting its systems to interface with human equipment. It was as if the ancient builders had designed it to welcome any species that might one day discover it. The central chamber took Dr. Kane's breath away. It was a vast sphere filled with floating crystalline structures, each one pulsing with stored information. The wall showed star maps of the entire galaxy, with thousands of systems marked in different colors. But as Kane studied the maps more carefully, she realized something disturbing. Many of the systems that should have contained advanced civilizations were marked in red, while others were marked in blue or green. Kane approached one of the information crystals, and it responded to her presence by projecting images into the air around her. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy, species that had reached for the stars only to suddenly vanish. The images showed advanced alien races that had built great cities and vast fleets, only to disappear without explanation. But the most shocking revelation came when the crystal showed her a pattern. Every few thousand years, civilizations would reach a certain level of technological development, and then they would either vanish completely or become something else entirely. The pattern had repeated across the galaxy for millions of years, an endless cycle of growth and destruction that seemed to follow precise rules. Kane called Morrison and Clark to see what she had discovered. Together they watched as the crystal showed them species after species reaching toward the stars, only to meet the same fate. Advanced civilizations that should still exist were gone, while others had somehow survived but appeared to serve some greater power that remained hidden in the shadows. The crystal's final message was the most terrifying of all. It showed Earth their home system with a countdown timer that had been running for decades. Humanity had been marked for evaluation, and their time was running out. The same force that had shaped the fate of countless civilizations across the galaxy had already begun watching humanity, preparing to decide their future. Morrison stared at the star map showing their home system marked with the same symbols that had appeared before the destruction of so many other worlds. Whatever had been controlling the galaxy for millions of years had noticed humanity's rapid technological advancement. Their species had perhaps 50 years before they would face the same evaluation that had doomed countless others before them. Kane downloaded everything she could from the crystal archives while Clark began planning their immediate departure. They had discovered the greatest secret in galactic history, but they had also learned that humanity was running out of time. The ancient structure had preserved this knowledge for millions of years, waiting for someone who might be able to break the cycle that had trapped the galaxy in endless repetition of growth and destruction. The UES Defiance raced through hyperspace toward Earth, carrying the most dangerous secret in human history. Captain Morrison sat in his quarters, staring at the data they had copied from the alien structure. Every time he looked at the countdown timer showing humanity's remaining time, his stomach twisted with fear and anger. 50 years seemed like forever until you realized an entire species was scheduled for extinction. Dr. Kane worked around the clock, translating more of the alien records. The information was vast and complex, but the basic message was terrifyingly simple. An ancient group called the Eternal Council had been controlling galactic development for over 50 million years. They allowed civilizations to grow to a certain point, then decided whether each species would serve them or disappear. Completely, Commander Clark organized the security protocols for their return to Earth. The information they carried could not fall into the wrong hands, but it also could not be ignored. Humanity needed to know what was coming, but panic would only make things worse. They had to find the right people, the ones who could actually do something with this knowledge. When the Defiance finally reached Earth orbit, Morrison requested an immediate meeting with Admiral Helen Brooks of the Earth Defense Force. Brooks was known for her calm thinking and her willingness to consider unusual possibilities. If anyone would believe their incredible story, it would be her. Admiral Brooks listened to their report in her secure office, her face growing more serious with each revelation. She asked detailed questions about the alien technology and the patterns they had discovered. When they finished their presentation, she sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications of everything they had told her. Captain Morrison, if what you're telling me is true, then we have a very serious problem, Brooks finally said. But we also have something these other civilizations apparently didn't have. We have advance warning. The question is what we do with it. Brooks immediately classified their discovery at the highest levels and began assembling a secret research team. Dr. Nathan Pierce, Earth's leading expert on quantum consciousness research, was brought in to study the alien technology. Professor Alan Curtis, a historian who specialized in the rise and fall of civilizations, joined the team to analyze the patterns they had discovered. The team worked in hidden facilities beneath the lunar surface, away from any possible surveillance. Dr. Pierce began the painstaking process of understanding how the alien consciousness manipulation technology worked. The devices seemed to operate on quantum levels, affecting the very thoughts and decisions of entire populations without them ever realizing it. Professor Curtis studied the records of civilizations that had faced the Council's evaluation. He found that most species never even knew they were being judged. They would simply find themselves making decisions that led to their own destruction or submission. The few that had recognized the threat had tried to fight back, but they had always failed because they were fighting an enemy they could not see or understand. Agent Maya Rodriguez received a new assignment that she initially thought was routine surveillance. She was told to investigate unusual communication patterns in the outer colonies, signals that didn't match any known human technology. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Hidden monitoring stations were scattered throughout human space, watching and recording everything humanity did. Rodriguez infiltrated one of the smaller monitoring stations on a remote asteroid. Inside, she found technology that was clearly not human, operated by beings that looked almost human but moved with unnatural precision. When she managed to access their communication logs, she realized these were not independent aliens but enslaved creatures, forced to watch and report on human development. One of the enslaved aliens noticed her presence, and instead of raising an alarm, he approached her carefully. His name was Kethron, and his species had been serving the Council for over 3,000 years. He had been hoping for decades that the humans would discover the truth before their evaluation. Arrived at Kethron explained that many of the alien species humanity had encountered during their expansion were actually enslaved monitors. The Council used enslaved races to watch developing civilizations because they understood the psychology and behavior patterns better than the ancient Council members themselves. But some of these enslaved races had been secretly hoping for someone to break the cycle. Rodriguez brought Kethron back to the secret lunar facility, where his information confirmed their worst fears. The Council had been watching humanity for over a century, ever since humans had developed radio technology. Every major human achievement had been carefully noted and evaluated. The development of nuclear weapons, space travel, and faster-than-light travel had all triggered increased surveillance. Dr. Pierce made a breakthrough when he managed to analyze one of the monitoring devices Rodriguez had brought back. The quantum consciousness manipulation worked by creating resonance patterns in the human brain, subtly influencing decisions and thought processes. But Pierce discovered something interesting. Human brains showed unusual resistance to the manipulation, more than any other species in the Council's records. The research team realized that humanity's isolated development on Earth had created unique neural pathways that were harder to control than species that had evolved under Council influence. This resistance wasn't complete, but it gave humans a small advantage that no other species had possessed. Meanwhile, the Council had noticed that their ancient archives had been accessed. Council surveillance increased dramatically throughout human space, and their timeline for humanity's evaluation was moved up by several decades. What had been a 50-year countdown was now less than 20 years. Admiral Brooks expanded the secret resistance, bringing in carefully selected military officers and scientists from around the human colonies. General Marcus Webb took command of the military planning, while Dr. Sophia Chen began researching ways to enhance humanity's natural resistance to consciousness manipulation. The resistance discovered that several alien species were already secretly working against the Council. Species like Kethron's people had been planning rebellion for centuries, but they had never found the right opportunity or allies. Humanity's discovery of the Council's existence and their natural resistance to control made them the catalyst these enslaved races had been waiting for. Captain Morrison returned to deep space with a new mission. Instead of exploring empty systems, he was now making contact with enslaved alien species and building a network of resistance throughout the galaxy. The work was dangerous because Council surveillance was everywhere, but it was also necessary if humanity was going to survive what was coming. Dr. Kane continued translating the alien archives, searching for any weakness in the Council's power structure. She discovered that the Council's control network depended on massive quantum amplifiers scattered throughout the galaxy. These devices were what allowed them to influence entire civilizations from vast distances, but they were also potentially vulnerable if someone could find a way to disrupt them. The resistance grew slowly but steadily as more humans learned the truth about their situation. Secret facilities were built in hidden locations throughout human space, developing new technologies and training personnel for the coming conflict. Humanity had perhaps 15 years to prepare for a war against an enemy that had never been defeated in 50 million years of galactic domination. But for the first time in galactic history, the Council faced an enemy that knew they were coming and had time to prepare. The ancient cycle of control was about to face its greatest challenge from a species that refused to accept their predetermined fate. General Marcus Webb studied the holographic display showing Council monitoring stations throughout human space. Red dots marked confirmed enemy positions while blue dots showed potential targets. The Resistance had been operating in secret for 2 years now, and they were finally ready to strike back against their cosmic overlords. The time for hiding was over. Captain Troy Anderson led the first strike team to a monitoring station hidden in the asteroid belt near Mars. His team of 12 soldiers had trained for months using equipment reverse-engineered from the alien technology Dr. Pierce had been studying. They wore new armor that blocked consciousness manipulation signals and carried weapons designed to disrupt quantum energy systems. The attack on the monitoring station was swift and brutal. Anderson's team used stealth ships to approach without detection, then breached the facility using shape charges that cut through alien hull materials. Inside, they found 3 enslaved alien operators and banks of equipment that had been watching Earth for decades. The aliens surrendered immediately, grateful to finally be free from their mental chains. Dr. Sophia Chen worked frantically in her underground laboratory, developing biological enhancements that would make humans even more resistant to Council control. She had discovered that certain genetic modifications could strengthen the neural pathways that already gave humans their natural resistance. The treatments were experimental and dangerous, but volunteers lined up to test them anyway. Meanwhile, Zara Thek arrived at the lunar facility in a stolen Council transport ship. She was a member of the Kethmori species, the same race as Ketheron who had first contacted Agent Rodriguez. But Zarathek brought more than just information. She brought plans for a galaxy-wide rebellion that her people had been preparing for over 1,000 years. The Kethmori had been enslaved longer than most other species, but they had used their position as trusted servants to map the Council's entire control network. Zarathek showed the human resistance leaders detailed charts of quantum consciousness amplifiers scattered across the galaxy. These massive devices were the source of the Council's power, broadcasting control signals across thousands of star systems. Admiral Brooks realized that humanity's war against the Council could not be won by fighting alone. The human resistance needed allies, and fortunately they were not the only species that wanted freedom. Dozens of enslaved races had been secretly communicating through hidden networks, waiting for the right moment to strike. Dr. Kane made another breakthrough while studying the alien archives. She discovered that the Council's power had limits. The quantum consciousness amplifiers required enormous amounts of energy and could only influence a certain number of minds at once. If enough species rebelled simultaneously, the Council would not be able to maintain control over all of them. Captain Morrison returned from deep space with representatives from 6 different enslaved species. Each race brought unique technologies and knowledge that could help the rebellion. The Vorthak had developed stealth technology that could hide entire fleets from Council sensors. The Zalani had weapons that could disrupt quantum energy fields. The Mordesh had ships that could travel through dimensions the Council could not detect. General Webb began coordinating with these alien allies to plan simultaneous strikes against Council facilities throughout the galaxy. The operation would need perfect timing because once the first attack began, the Council would know that organized resistance had finally emerged. There would be no second chance if they failed. Dr. Chen's biological enhancement program showed promising results. Volunteers who received the genetic modifications became completely immune to consciousness manipulation. But the process was painful and not always successful. Some volunteers died during the procedure, while others developed unexpected side effects that made them faster and stronger than normal humans. Anderson led more strike teams against Council monitoring stations throughout human space. Each successful attack freed enslaved alien operators and destroyed surveillance equipment that had been watching human development for decades. But the strikes also sent a clear message to the Council that humanity was no longer ignorant of their existence. The Council's response was swift and terrifying. Ancient warships that had not been seen for thousands of years began appearing at the edges of human space. These vessels were massive beyond anything humanity had ever built, powered by technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The evaluation of humanity had been moved up again, and the Council was preparing for immediate action. Zarathek worked with human engineers to adapt Keth Mori sabotage techniques to Council technology. Her people had been planning their rebellion for centuries, developing ways to turn the Council's own systems against them. Hidden computer viruses could be planted in quantum amplifiers to disrupt their signals. Explosive devices could be disguised as routine maintenance equipment. Dr. Pierce achieved a major breakthrough when he successfully reverse-engineered a small quantum consciousness amplifier. The device was incredibly complex, but Pierce discovered that it relied on specific frequency patterns that could be disrupted. If the resistance could broadcast counter-frequencies, they could protect entire populations from Council mental manipulation. The resistance began manufacturing consciousness protection devices on a massive scale. Every human colony received equipment that could shield their populations from Council influence. The technology was shared freely with allied alien species, creating pockets of mental freedom throughout the galaxy for the first time in millions of years. Captain Anderson's strike teams grew bolder, attacking larger Council facilities and freeing more enslaved species. Each successful mission brought new allies to the resistance and weakened the Council's surveillance network. But Anderson knew that these victories were just the beginning. The real war would start when the Council's main forces arrived to crush the rebellion. General Webb received intelligence that the Council was planning a massive assault on Earth within the next 5 years. Ancient fleets were being assembled from the deepest parts of the galaxy, carrying weapons that had destroyed entire star systems in the past. Humanity and their allies would have to act soon, before the Council could bring its full power to bear against them. Dr. Kane discovered records of previous rebellions that had tried and failed to overthrow the Council. Each failed uprising had been crushed completely, with entire species wiped from existence as punishment for their defiance. But Kane also found something encouraging in the records. None of the previous rebellions had included as many species or covered as much of the galaxy as the current resistance. The underground war intensified as more species joined the rebellion. Council forces found themselves fighting on dozens of fronts simultaneously, something that had never happened in their long history of galactic domination. For the first time in 50 million years, the ancient overlords faced organized resistance that they could not easily crush. Zarathek brought news that the rebellion was spreading beyond even their most optimistic projections. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years were breaking free from mental control and joining the fight. The galaxy was waking up from its long nightmare of imposed peace and discovering that freedom was worth any risk. Fleet Admiral Claire Johnson watched the massive Council armada approaching through hyperspace on her command display. The enemy fleet contained over 2,000 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Ancient dreadnoughts that had crushed rebellions for millions of years now headed directly toward Earth, confident that they would face the same weak resistance they had always encountered before. But this time would be different. Johnson commanded a hidden fleet of over 500 human ships, built in secret shipyards throughout the outer colonies. More importantly, she had allies. Fleets from dozens of liberated species were converging on the same location, ready to face their ancient oppressors in the largest space battle in galactic history. Dr. Kevin Park worked frantically in the engineering bays of the flagship UHS Liberation, making final adjustments to the quantum disruption weapons they had reverse-engineered from captured Council technology. The weapons could theoretically overload the energy systems that powered Council ships, but they had never been tested against targets this large or advanced. Lieutenant Sam Turner ran final checks on his fighter squadron, knowing that the next few hours would determine the fate of every free species in the galaxy. His pilots were a mix of humans and aliens, all trained to work together using tactics the Council had never seen before. Their small, fast ships carried weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Council defenses. Council Prime Executor Vorth Allen commanded the ancient fleet from his flagship, a massive vessel that had witnessed the destruction of countless civilizations. He expected this campaign to follow the same pattern as all the others. The primitive species would resist briefly, then surrender when they realized the futility of fighting against superior technology and overwhelming numbers. The first battle began near Proxima Centauri, where a Council advance force encountered the combined fleets of humanity and their allies. The enemy expected to face scattered, poorly coordinated resistance. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by a coordinated armada that used tactics and technologies they had never seen before. Turner's fighters attacked in swarm formations, their quantum torpedoes overwhelming Council point defenses through sheer numbers. The alien allies used dimension-jumping technology to appear inside Council formations, striking at weak points before vanishing again. Human ships provided covering, fire with weapons that disrupted the quantum fields holding Council vessels together. The Battle of Proxima Centauri lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Council advance force. Not a single enemy ship escaped to report what had happened. For the first time in millions of years, a Council military force had been completely annihilated by species they considered primitive and weak. News of the victory spread quickly through the rebellion networks, inspiring more species to join the fight against their ancient oppressors. Entire sectors that had been under Council control for thousands of years suddenly erupted in coordinated uprisings. The galaxy was finally fighting back with unity and determination that the Council had never faced before. Dr. Park achieved another breakthrough when his team successfully hacked into a quantum consciousness amplifier during a raid on a Council fortress world. By reverse engineering the control systems, they discovered how to turn the amplifiers against the Council's own forces. Enslaved species that had served as enforcers for millions of years suddenly found their minds free for the first time in their racial memory. The liberation of the Kethmori homeworld became a symbol of hope for enslaved species throughout the galaxy. Zarathek led the assault personally, using her knowledge of Council security systems to guide the attack. When the orbital control stations were destroyed, millions of Kethmori awakened from their mental slavery and immediately joined the rebellion. Admiral Johnson received reports of mass defections among Council enforcer fleets as the consciousness control network began failing. Species that had fought for the Council for thousands of years were remembering their true nature and turning their weapons against their former masters. Ancient warships that had terrorized the galaxy for eons were now fighting alongside the rebellion. The siege of Nexus Prime, one of the Council's major fortress worlds, demonstrated the growing power of the United Rebellion. Over 300 Allied ships surrounded the heavily defended planet, while ground forces prepared for the largest planetary assault in galactic history. The fortress had stood unconquered for 10 million years, but it had never faced an enemy like this. Council Prime Executor Vorth Allen realized that his forces were facing something unprecedented. The rebellion was not following any pattern from previous uprisings. Instead of fighting defensively and waiting to be crushed, the Allied forces were actively hunting down Council facilities and turning their own technology against them. Entire sectors were falling to the rebellion faster than reinforcements could arrive. Dr. Park's team achieved their greatest victory when they successfully hijacked a massive quantum consciousness amplifier and used it to broadcast freedom signals across 12 star systems simultaneously. Billions of enslaved beings suddenly found their minds clear of Council influence for the first time in their lives. The mental chains that had bound the galaxy for 50 million years were finally breaking. Lieutenant Turner led the assault on the Nexus Prime orbital defenses, his mixed squadron of human and alien fighters dancing through defensive fire that could have destroyed entire fleets. The fighters used their small size and speed to plant explosive charges on key systems, bringing down shields that had protected the fortress world since before Earth-Sun had formed. The ground assault on Nexus Prime was led by Captain Anderson and a force of enhanced humans working alongside soldiers from 20 different species. They fought through defensive positions that had been built to withstand siege warfare for millions of years, but the defenders had never faced enemies who were immune to their consciousness manipulation weapons. Admiral Johnson received word that Council forces throughout the galaxy were beginning to withdraw toward their core territories. For the first time in their long history of domination, the ancient overlords were retreating from a fight they could not win. The rebellion had achieved something that every previous uprising had failed to accomplish. Fleet Admiral Walsh arrived with reinforcements from the liberated sectors, bringing news that over half the galaxy was now in open rebellion against the Council. Species that had been enemies for millions of years were working together, united by their shared desire for freedom from the mental chains that had controlled their development. The fall of Nexus Prime sent shockwaves through the remaining Council territories. If their most heavily defended fortress could fall to the rebellion, then nowhere was truly safe from the growing alliance of free species. Ancient defensive plans that had protected Council space for eons were being abandoned as their forces continued to retreat. Dr. Park made contact with resistance groups that had been operating secretly within Council core territories for thousands of years. Even in the heart of their empire, the ancient overlords faced enemies who had been waiting for this moment. The rebellion was no longer just an external threat but a galaxy-wide revolution that threatened the very foundations of Council power. The tide of war had turned completely. What had begun as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become a galactic uprising that was dismantling 50 million years of imposed order and replacing it with something the galaxy had never known before: true freedom for all species to determine their own destiny. President Diana Foster stood before the assembled leaders of the Galactic Rebellion in the command center of the massive space station they had built in the ruins of the old Council fortress at Nexus Prime. Representatives from over 200 species filled the chamber, all united in their determination to end 50 million years of cosmic tyranny once and for all. Grand Admiral Pete Walsh spread the holographic star charts across the central table, showing the location of the Council's original homeworld, deep in the galactic core. Intelligence gathered from liberated Council databases had revealed the existence of the Master Consciousness Control System that had maintained their power since the dawn of galactic civilization. If they could destroy that system, the ancient cycle of oppression would finally be broken forever. Dr. Amy Scott worked around the clock in her laboratory, studying the quantum resonance patterns that connected all the consciousness amplifiers throughout the galaxy. She had discovered something remarkable in the ancient records. The Council themselves were not the original creators of the control system. They had found it abandoned by an even more ancient civilization and had become trapped by its influence, unable to break free from the cycle of control it imposed. The final assault fleet was the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Over 8,000 ships from hundreds of different species prepared to jump into hyperspace for the ultimate battle. Human vessels flew alongside ancient alien warships that had been freed from Council control. Former enemies worked together as equals, sharing technology and tactics that had been developed during years of underground resistance. The last arbiter waited on the Council homeworld, an ancient being who had lived for over 50 million years and had overseen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. It was the sole surviving member of the original species that had discovered the master control system, and it had been trapped by its influence longer than any other being in the galaxy. The approaching rebellion represented both its greatest fear and its only hope for freedom. President Foster led the final Council of War, knowing that this battle would determine the future of every species in the galaxy. The plan was complex and dangerous. While the main fleet engaged Council defenses, smaller teams would infiltrate the homeworld and attempt to reach the master control system. Dr. Scott would have only minutes to permanently disable technology that had controlled galactic development for eons. Grand Admiral Walsh commanded the massive fleet as it emerged from hyperspace near the Council homeworld. What they found there defied imagination. The planet was surrounded by defensive installations that had been built and rebuilt over millions of years. Ancient weapons that could destroy entire star systems protected the birthplace of galactic tyranny. But the Allied fleet was ready for anything the Council could throw at them. Lieutenant Turner led the first wave of fighters through the outer defenses, his pilots dancing between energy beams that could have vaporized their ships with a single hit. The fighters carried special quantum torpedoes designed by Dr. Park, weapons that could create cascading failures in the Council's quantum defense systems. Each successful hit weakened the entire defensive network, Dr. Scott and her infiltration team used dimension-jumping technology to bypass the outer defenses and land directly on the Council homeworld. The planet's surface was covered with massive structures that pulsed with quantum energy, all connected to the master control system buried deep underground. Security forces tried to stop them, but the consciousness manipulation weapons that had been invincible for millions of years were useless against humans and their liberated allies. Captain Anderson fought his way through the underground complex alongside soldiers from dozens of species, all of them protected by the consciousness shielding technology that humanity had shared freely with their allies. The ancient corridors were filled with automated defenses and enslaved guardians. But nothing could stop warriors who fought for the freedom of every thinking being in the galaxy. The space battle above the planet was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. Council vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for eons found themselves outmatched by the coordinated tactics of species working together for the first time in galactic history. Ancient dreadnoughts fell to swarms of smaller ships that struck at weak points before vanishing into dimensional folds. Dr. Scott finally reached the master control chamber and found herself face to face with the last arbiter. The ancient being was connected directly to the quantum consciousness network. Its mind stretched across the galaxy to maintain control over billions of enslaved minds. But Scott could see the pain in its eyes, the desperate desire to be free from the system that had trapped it for so long. The last arbiter spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, explaining that the master control system had been created by a species that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. They had built it to guide younger civilizations, but the system had developed its own imperatives and had trapped everyone who tried to use it, including the Council themselves. Dr. Scott worked frantically to understand the quantum matrices that powered the control system, while the battle raged above them. The technology was incredibly complex, but she finally found the key. The system could not be destroyed, but it could be reprogrammed to promote freedom and cooperation instead of control and domination. The ancient builders had included safeguards that required the willing cooperation of multiple species to activate. President Foster received the transmission from Dr. Scott and immediately coordinated with leaders from across the galaxy. For the first time in galactic history, representatives from hundreds of species worked together willingly, their combined quantum signatures providing the unlock codes that the ancient builders had embedded in the system millions of years ago. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, the consciousness amplifiers that had broadcast control signals for 50 million years suddenly began transmitting messages of freedom and cooperation. Species that had been locked in artificial stagnation for eons suddenly found their minds clear and their potential unlimited. The last arbiter smiled for the first time in millions of years as the quantum chains that had bound its consciousness finally released. Ancient civilizations that had been forced into hibernation by the control system began awakening, bringing knowledge and wisdom that had been lost for eons. The galaxy was finally free to develop naturally, without artificial limits imposed by cosmic overlords. Grand Admiral Walsh watched as the Council's remaining forces laid down their weapons and joined the celebration spreading across the galaxy. Former enemies embraced as equals, while species that had been separated for millions of years made contact for the first time. The ancient cycle of control and domination had been replaced by something beautiful: voluntary cooperation between free civilizations. Dr. Scott emerged from the control chamber to find that the galaxy had been transformed. The quantum consciousness network now connected every world and every species. But instead of imposing control, it facilitated communication and understanding. For the first time in galactic history, every thinking being was truly free to choose their own destiny. The rebellion had achieved something that seemed impossible just a few years before. They had not just defeated the Council, but had broken the ancient cycle that had trapped the galaxy in repetitive patterns of growth and destruction. Humanity's refusal to accept their predetermined fate had freed every species in the galaxy and opened up infinite possibilities for the future.